kind of, linear narrative structure on it. I'm wondering how you approached that when you were doing the screenplay and when you were conceiving of how you're going to tell the story.
Mostly it's a gut thing, that if you tell a narrative story, a beginning, middle, and end of a real person's life, there's an implication that you know the truth. This happened, then that happened, then that happened. And that's not the way anybody's life really works. And I was interested in the idea of the way that the past, the present, and the future intersect with each other all the time. And I just loved the idea of Townes Van Zandt, in a strange way, trying to make his friend famous by telling a story about digging him up from a grave. And I thought that'd be an amazing way to start a movie. And when I read, Ben and I had long been thinking about Blaze as an idea for a movie, but when I read Sybil Rosen's book, her book is not, when I first read it, I thought, I'm going to do this for research about Blaze, and I imagined that it would be this kind of classic deification of an individual, of a rock star. He smoked a cigarette like this, or whatever, and the book isn't about that at all. It's about a young woman falling in love with a guy, and about falling in love with a ghost, and wondering why people sabotage their own lives, and how these songs kind of held, they were almost like time capsules. Ben says this thing that I love that I'll steal here tonight about this idea that a song exists, and you first hear about it, say it's a love song, and you like the song, and then you fall in love, and then you play it for your lover, and the song becomes this kind of symbol of your love affair. And then you break up, and you hear the song again a year later, and you start to cry, and then 20 years go by, you hear the song, and it's this kind of hopeful nostalgia. You get the song back, and the song hasn't changed, but you've changed. And it's I guess another word for it is melancholy. And that's what I felt like the movie was supposed to be, and so I was always hunting for that feeling.
You found it really well. I'm curious how you guys, each of you, when you first encountered his music, and also what do you think makes him, like, he is a great songwriter, what do you guys think makes him a great songwriter?
Well, I'm a musical explorer and a spelunker. I go deep and try to find things, And in the late 90s, I was turned on to Townes Van Zandt when I was like 20. And around that time, I heard his name, and I knew that he died, and I knew that he wrote If I Could Only Fly. That's about all I knew. And some years later, John Prine covered Play Pigeons, and I learned a lot more about him. So as it sort of evolved and sort of I understood who he was, I went through a period of my life where I was, super down and out and had the super BLUESs, and I listened to a lot of Mississippi John Hurt. And if you don't know who Mississippi John Hurt is, he plays that same kind of simple finger-picking blues, 3 chords, simple. When you listen to it, you think, I can play that. But when you get into it, in your own way, you can do it. But if you want to try to do what Blaze does, and you want to try to do what Mississippi John Hurt does, it's a little bit trickier than that. And there's a lope to the breath, and there's a lope to the rhythm. And Blaze and Townes and John Hurt and Mississippi Fred McDowell and people like that, they have an edge that they hone on the edge of the songwriting and the performing of it. And when you first start out doing something like that, it's okay. And then when you do it for a long time, and writing the music becomes something you don't have a choice of anymore, it elevates to another place. And when I first heard Blaze Foley, it was like maybe 12 years ago where I really heard him. And it took me back to John Hurt, and it took me back to Lightning Hawkins, and it took me back to all this music, but Robert Johnson for that matter, where something very mysterious happens. And it just comes from doing it a lot and thinking about it a lot and being hypnotized to it, And Blaze was one of those people. And all the people who I know that were around him toward the end of his life said if you went to go see Blaze, there'd be 25 people there and 19 of them would be musicians, because they were watching him like a hawk trying to figure out what he was don't know what it is. It's just plain old living, I suppose.
I need to ask this just because I think it's kind of funny. You've spent so many hours of your life being directed by Richard Linklater.
Yeah.
What is it like to direct Richard Linklater?
It's funny, because I spent a lot of hours being directed by him, but I've also spent a lot of hours riding with him and a lot of hours in airplanes and airports and hanging out and doing this right now, what we're doing. And I remember, he's a funny guy, and he came to set, and I hadn't really thought about that. I wanted him to be in the movie because I love him, and because I knew the way I wanted the oil meant to be funny. Blaze had this one moment. It was important that you not think when you watch the movie that, oh, the world sucks, they didn't notice this amazing poet. People did notice, and he blew it up. These guys, with their own hard-earned money, started an oil company, and they want to start a label, and they loved him, and they want to do it, and he saw them as a joke. And I've seen so many creative people have a allergy to the necessary phoniness to make something public, and they'd almost rather blow it up. And so I kind of the camera sees them the way Blaze sees them. They're men with hats, but I wanted them to secretly be people that you liked. And so Steve Zahn, Sam Rockwell, and Rick is from Houston. And Rick actually knows a lot about he worked offshore oil. And so I thought, oh, he could be really right for this. And he came in. These are the weird details. This is not probably what you're interested in the question, but I admire him a lot. He's been a great friend and teacher to me. And one of the things that happened in a production meeting when you're making a movie on a shoestring budget is people say, we got to cut something. And I'm an actor. And my whole life, I've hated script supervisors because they tell you, oh, in take 3, you held the microphone in your left hand, then you held in your right hand, so we can't use the take when you cried, and blah, 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 and I hate them. I have a pathology about it. And so I said, well, let's cut the script supervisor. We don't need one. We don't need one. I'm great at matching. I'll do that. And my wife, who's a producer, goes, you got a lot to think about. Maybe you don't want to think about matching. So, the script supervisor, it's a waste of money, honey. It's a waste of money. And so we're cutting it. So we cut it. And I remember, I really wasn't thinking that much about it. I was kind of pleased with myself about not making a movie without a script supervisor. And Rick comes to set. It's his first day, and we're there. And he looks around and he goes, hey, can I talk to Scripty? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I got that. And he looked at me. He's like, you what? I said, well, we need to save some money. And so, I was like, he said, well, who's doing the notes for the editor? What do you mean? He said, well, script supervisors, they do the notes. Like when I'm in the editing room, I get all their notes about which takes I prefer. Like, they don't.
Oops.
Yeah, they don't just do matching. And I was like, oh yeah, that's true. And so man, let me tell you, editing this movie took forever because nothing was written down. There were no notes about, there were just treehouse scenes, Baton Rouge scenes. I mean, the poor editor had to cry himself to sleep every night trying to organize this stuff. So that was my basic feeling about having my director on set. It was, he kind of cut me at the ankles right away.
Nice. Who has a question for these guys? Yes, up here.
So it's a kind of two-part question. Of the songs that were played or the songs that you heard during your research for this film, which ones did you connect with the most? And how do you take your coffee, hot or sweet?
I like that. There's 2 of them that stick out. One of them is Sitting by the Road. Sitting by the Road sounds like some mantra that somebody from many, many eons ago might have said over and over and over. Sitting by the road, going nowhere, wondering, why are we here? Why do we die? What did I say? Did I really try? And he wrote that early on, and something that always was interesting to me was Gerf Morlix, who was a running partner of Blaze's. He told me that that was one of Gerf's favorite songs, and he said on a dime one day, Blaze just didn't want to play that song anymore. And he said, well, we got to play that song. He said, it's gone. I don't want to play it anymore. And the other one, I think the strongest one that hits me pretty hard is Cold, Cold World. Coco World also sounds ancient, and you know, what he's talking about is not, it's not as heavy as, like, you know, there's been an earthquake and a bunch of people died. It's like, he's talking about time, and he's talking about, you know, being on a bus and not having a dime, and, like, you know, all these constructs that sort of, like, are mildly cruel. And there's something about Blaze seeing the world that way that always just got me close to him. So those two songs are the ones for me. As far as my coffee goes, so I grew up, all them jokes I grew up with, you know, so I brought all those jokes. Something that's funny about that joke is that I edited that joke. I made a slight edit, because when I grew up with that joke, the joke went in its simplest terms. He wanted a cup of coffee, and the nurse said, "Do you like coffee? Do you like cream and sugar?" And he says, "Just a little bit of sugar." But I always didn't like, you know, don't give up that. Just let him say, "It's too sweet."
Ethan, you want to, any song in particular?
Well, you know, the songs, in a lot of ways, I used to call this our country western opera, and that the script is really stitched together around the songs. In a lot of ways, I listen to the music a lot, and his writing is so personal that you can find where he's at, you know, with the songs, and tell the story with the songs. And that was my hope, is to kind of use the songs as fence posts and to bounce off, you know, these three different time periods. I had this idea that, you know, if you're in a church and you see, like, the story of St. Francis, right? And there's a stained glass wall, and it's got a couple images of his life or something on it. Well, what if that was Blaze? And what if you shattered it? You know, and here I am, and I'm just trying to piece them back together. And I have the songs, and I can organize these four. So I'm giving you just these shards of a piece of glass trying to put back together. Is that true? Is that not true? Does that go with that? But the songs would be true. That was everything. We're making up everything except the songs. He could tell his story in his own words with the songs. And so I just listened to them, and I wasn't really seeking out my favorites as much as I was seeking out ones that would communicate the story. The most obvious example is I Should Have Been Home Alone with You. It's an amazing moment to me that he writes very clearly about leaving the treehouse. The treehouse to me became this symbol of where everything was working, the masculine and feminine, it's working together. Creativity's easy, it's fun, it's not for anything. You know, it's just to sing. And that's beautiful. And then you go, oh, maybe we could do something with this. Let's go to town. Let's take these to town. We could do something with this and get something from this. And it's a shift. It's a big shift, right? And his first song in Austin is I Should Have Been Home Alone. I Should Have Been Home with You. And it's a clear indicator, if you're writing a musical, that, oh, there she is. She can do it. She can get a job, she can go on auditions, she's working, she's living her life, and he's frozen. And it's the first reveal of something that's going wrong. You know, is in, why didn't he stay home with her? Well, inside that is the whole problem. Yeah.
Who else has a question? I'm sure somebody else has a question. I keep asking. Yes.
So, going with the non-linear structure of the story, going from the songs to the part of the story, that combined with the fact that we didn't have a script, I'm curious how long the actual editing process was.
Well, did you guys hear that? You heard it, right? Yeah. It was extremely long for the scale of the movie that we're on. Part of the idea was that my friend had never acted in a movie. And I had no real idea how he was gonna do, you know? And I knew, like he did, that the music was gonna be terrific, you know? And so I had these ideas where I would say, well, let's do this scene where this happens, and that would go great. And then I said, well, let's do this. Everything we kept doing, Ben kept rising to the challenge and going deeper and deeper into character and having more and more fun. And I started collecting more and more footage. And so I had this thing where I'm like, well, I'll probably cut that out because that one of these scenes won't work and I'll have to cut them out. And this editor, this amazing editor that I found, he just lost his marbles going down the rabbit hole. He was like, this scene is so good, this has to be in the movie. I'm like, and I had to start being the one going, buddy, we can't put everything in the movie. We have to figure this out. And it was also not just Ben, it was Charlie Sexton too. The DNA of the project was to cast musicians. You know, to Charlie Sexton to play Townes Van Zandt. Well, the funny thing is they both could act. And they took it really seriously and they put their artistry in it as well. And I had Alia Shawkat and Josh Hamilton. The design of the screenplay is such that none of those guys are ever alone in the scene. You know, that they had somebody who was really experienced acting to be there always. The way you would put an inexperienced musician with an experienced musician, you know, it was like and they all started feeding off each other. And a lot of things worked that I didn't think would work. And it was really exciting and really difficult to hunt for the movie of what it was I was trying to say with the movie, not just what scenes are good.
How did you approach, I mean, one of the most haunting scenes is Chris Christopherson. How did that come about? How did you get him?
Well, that's a really good question because wasn't really scripted either in any conventional sense of what a script does. I feel my secret in the movie is that I was drawn to Blaze because I felt I knew him through the music because I understand being bipolar. And I wanted to write about that, and I gave myself permission to write about Blaze without having met the man, because I think that there's a lot of Blazes in this universe, a lot of poets who are waiting tables and here tonight and who are around, and poets, for lack of a better word, right? People who are really sensitive, people who are really trying to help make sense, people who are fighting for the dispossessed, people who see hypocrisy, people who don't want to just make money. What's the guy, the Greek guy that Gerf called Blade? The Diogenes, you know, the man who would sleep, who wouldn't play society's game. I don't want to make money. I don't want to be powerful. I want to be alive and show you how beautiful it is to be alive. And I want to point out your hypocrisy. What am I talking about? Why did I got that right.
Chris.
Oh, Chris, thank you. Woo, I went on. So I knew that Blaze, who the hell's Blaze Foley's father? Right? Like, and we're making a movie about outlaw country, and I have an actor who's a musician, and it hit me like, wow, you know, it'd be an amazing blessing on the movie is if we got Chris, one of my favorite musician actors. You know, he's one of the great musician actors ever. And it would be a little secret blessing on Ben Dickey. And it would also be a secret tip of the hat to Blaze Foley. Because Chris is that generation. I mean, he is outlaw country. You know, so who was supposed to be his father? And so we just invited him to set. And maybe I'll tell
He showed up.
And he showed up. We couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe it. And I'll tell you guys something, if you're patient, hopefully this isn't too long, but it was one of the most amazing days of my life because, and Ben's too, all of us, we're all fans. And he came in and we did the scene. It was wonderful to work with, that whole thing of just asking everybody, you know, do you have a cigarette? That's his idea. And this doesn't really care. Oh, there's my son. Yeah, fine. Whatever. And we wrap him. Yay, Chris Christopherson. Thanks for your great time. Thanks for coming out. Big applause. Sends him out. We start working on a different scene. Half an hour goes by. Lisa, his wife, comes onto the set and says, hey, would it be all right if Chris redid his close-up? And you have to understand, I'm working with like 15 cents, right? Like every 10 minutes is my life's blood. And I'm like, you know what, we don't really need to do that. That's cool that he wants to do that, but no, we don't, like we've moved on, the camera's out of that room. And Lisa said, Chris is really upset. And he'd really like to do his close-up again. And it's like, okay. And, you know, I say to Ben, I say, hey man, we're gonna go back and do that. I say to the DP, we're going back to the room, we're gonna redo, and Chris walks on the set and he says, I forgot that we were making a movie. People play songs for me all the time, and this beautiful young man is playing. He's obviously a gifted musician, and I just thought he wanted me to play for him, and I came down here for a reason. I wanted to play this part because that's my son, right? Yeah, and he points to Alinda, who's playing Blaze's sister. He said, that's my daughter, right? He said, you know what happens when you're my age and your kids come to visit, don't you? I'm like, no. He said, you say goodbye. And I wanted to put on film saying goodbye. And I forgot. That's what it's like. So you got to give me another chance, you know? And so we did the shot, and all this emotion started pouring out of him. And it was so beautiful. And then I tell the story, I hope that he won't mind. I tell the story because the artist that is Chris Christopherson, he's an old man now. And that artist is still very present and still working. And he flew down there for a reason. We didn't know it. We thought he's doing a favor, or he liked Blaze, or he wants to be nice. But he had something to say in his scene, and he said it. But meaning the script it shifted all the time.
Yes, sir.
The two guys being interviewed. Right. Thank you for asking that question. Yeah.
The question is about the scene in the radio, basically the extended sequences in the radio station and the interaction between the characters.
In a way, it's the narrator, right? You know, that's the engine of the movie, is these two friends kind of warring for what's the story, right? You know, and I was fascinated by myth making. You know, there's a certain bit of myth making that goes on with celebrity, a certain bit of lying, that one person is more special than another person. As soon as you say that, you lie. You know, and yet without it, there's something. When I heard Towns do this radio interview where he talks about digging up Blaze Foley, I thought to myself, this is crazy. And I also thought, this man is trying to help his deceased friend. He's creating a legend. He's making you wonder, is that true? Did you hear that? Who's Blaze Foley? It makes you think like, oh, in a way, it's very mysterious to me. And then there's another friend who's a survivor, and the friend who actually was there, the friend who actually cleaned up the puke, the friend who actually, you know, did the hard, who drove him, the friend who let him sleep on his couch, you know, the friend who didn't idealize his suicide. Right? There's a certain bit of romanticism that goes along with self-destruction. That is, I mean, I loved, one time we got to listen to Gerf Morlix, who was another contemporary of Towns's and Blaze's, who played with Blaze a lot. And he used to say nothing upset him more than watching young people romanticize Blaze being shot. He's my friend, and he was an addict. And it was an accident. It was a terrible, terrible accident, you know? But young people love to see these things and romanticize them. And I kind of wanted to watch that war between what creates celebrity, what creates a legend, what's the truth. I remember I got to interview, I've told you this, but I got to interview Chris Christopherson once when I was younger. That's how I got to know him. And he talked about how much it bothered him that Johnny Cash always told this story about Sunday morning coming down, that Chris had landed his helicopter with a beer in one hand and the cassette in the other, landed on his front lawn and said, you had to listen to this, Johnny, you know? And Chris, like, it's the weird thing about that story is it made me famous, and it's not true. Like, have you ever flown a helicopter? He asked me. I'm like, no. And he's like, well, it's like, you couldn't do it with a beer in your hand. He's like, you know, it's really hard. And if I'd landed on Johnny Cash's front yard, I'd be arrested for, you know. But it's a great story, you know, and it's a story that makes the song famous, and songs need that kind of legend. Well, he just said when the man who was not Towns takes Sybil to the grave at the end. For me, those are the two survivors. They're the people who aren't famous, who are telling the story, and they know the real story. And they took care of themselves, and they lived to fight another day, and they made this movie. You know, without Gerfin's, you know, Josh is that character Zeus in Ellen is an amalgamation of Gerf, this other character, and Sybil, it's a very beautiful thing to me that when Blaze's last words were, "Please don't let me die," you know, and Sybil, in some way, heard that. And she has done that for him. You know, she wrote this book. She helped write this movie. You watched it tonight, and who he is, the artist that he is has not died. Anyway, should we call it a night? Yeah. Thank you guys. All right.
Thanks very much.